So number one up, this is lower transmission oil pump. So this pump picks up the oil at the bottom of the transmission, takes it up into the front of the tractor to the high pressure pump into the reservoir and to the high pressure pump. It also supplies the hydro pack and a couple of minor other things. I'm trying to think just off the top of my head, but anyway, high pressure is a different circuit. This is a low pressure circuit. This is the 150 psi circuit. Now, so this is the old pump. This is a brand new pump. Got this brand new pump, and I'll move on to this in a moment as well. But anyway, this here, if I just open this up, be able to show exactly what's going on. I can get it open on one hand. Okay, so this here, I don't know how good the camera is, but you can probably hear that scratching noise. So I have grooves on that there, quite significant grooves on that. So that's no longer smooth. That should be perfectly smooth. So over the years of whenever this tractor had problems, was metal got up through the tractor, the back end oil filter actually completely bursted, and it sucked it up into the entire pumps, and all the valves and everything had to be taken apart, changed, valves changed. A lot of work was done. So all this here, this gear, this is how it pumps oil. So this keeps turning here. For anybody who doesn't really understand, all it does is take the oil in on one side and push it out on the other side, and between them gears is your seal. And obviously this face here against this needs to be perfectly smooth. There's virtually barely any room between both of them plates. They have to be just perfect. The lower side, we also have a lot of scoring, or anywhere you have that scoring, you lose your seal, you lose your oil seal. And once you lose your oil pressure, then you don't have enough oil getting to the front of your tractor, and then the whole thing doesn't work right. So that side there isn't actually as bad. There's one small groove, but you can still see the significant wear on it. So we got a new pump, worked out pretty reasonable. An awful lot cheaper than buying it genuine. So this is the new pack I got. This is part of the high-low, and this is the Planetary gear set that broke on me on the last one. So obviously all the parts of this are good, but it's been laying out probably outside for a while, so it's kind of got a wee bit tight on that. So I'm going to clean it all up now and take it apart, clean it all up. Hopefully most of the parts is all right in it. I'm judging by the rust. We'll see what the bearings and all that's like inside, and or the damaged or the rotten, or might have to get a few bits for it, but hopefully not. Everything in this looks a hell of a lot better than what mine was, so we're going to go with that. So I'm going to dismantle this down and see where we're at with that. So moving on, this is part of the PTO pack, and the PTO pack is in bad order. So we have part of it here. So inside in here there's a groove which shouldn't be in it. This is all damaged from the seals. The seal was gone and it was rubbing. It was wearing into the housing hard, so it's damaged it. That goes down in through the center of this, including all the plates. So we're gonna have to get a new one of those, and get the PTO brake is pretty good. That's the PTO brake there. So it's everything in it seems to be okay. Not going to worry about it. But this piston here, you see, sits down in here across the seal. There's a seal in there, and the seal bursted on the pack. So I'll show you the seal here. The seal actually came out literally like that. I didn't actually even break it. It was already broken. So there's a piece missing out of it. So yeah, it's in bad shape. So I have to get a whole new rebuild kit for this. Plates, everything, seals, everything, and rebuild that, because that would have been losing oil pressure. And all the plates that goes into that slide in here, in behind this piston. This piston activates and pushes the plates up, down, etc. So whenever I'm putting it back together, I'll explain a bit more. It's in pretty good shape actually, this. Even though it was left outside or something, rust. Actually all the plates, all these plates here are actually pretty good looking, so it won't matter anyway. I'm not going to be using them. I have a fully brand new set, so this is the most important part of the puzzle here. To make sure that this was good. This was the broken part of the puzzle, so we want to make sure this is all going to be right. So I take all this apart now. I'm not really worried about that whole section at all, as I have one. My own section is fine, that section is okay, the pack itself, but this planetary system here is in bad shape, so I'll try and take this apart now. And bear in mind these are timed, so as you can see you have an arrow in 3 places, which is to line up correspondence with these planet gears here. So on these gears, I just can't show you at the moment, but there is a mark. If you picture one of these planets, there's a mark here, and then this tooth lines up in the center of the 2 marks. So I'll just grab one to show. So this here, you can see 2 marks here on this gear here, and then obviously that arrow goes in between the center of those. They must be lined up or this won't work properly. This will be under strain and stress, it'll break. So this is one of the old ones, so this is damaged. There's damage on all these teeth on the inside, so I'm not going to use any of these. So you're wondering, the rust won't do it any harm. I'll have it clean, but it'll still be rusty, but it won't make any difference. Won't do any harm to it. It'd be different if it was completely rotten, but it won't do any harm. So we're going to try to get these pins out now. Should come out. Hopefully, might have to put some. I take these out now. I'm going to try and make sure I keep all the bearings of each gear together, etc., because they would have all worn together at some stage, and if they're good enough, I'd like to just use the entire piece without having to buy parts for it, because the parts are just that dear. Don't want to have to buy anything for it. This was expensive enough, never mind having to buy brand new parts, especially when you don't need them, because these don't really normally give much trouble. So it's a really good sign on that, because that pin is actually really in good shape. I have no pins in any good shape, so it's actually in really good condition. The last pins I had are all ate away here. So I just take this gear out now. So we have a shim on each side. The bearings, but that bearing's good. The other one's full of rust. So if that bearing itself is actually rusty, I'll have to change it. Not sure. Don't know if it's rust from the gear or rust from the bearing, so anyway, I think I'll take it apart first, as I said. I'll shim. So I'll probably mark these now as I go. Keep everything to one. Just one out. And I'll just simply mark these 1, 2 and 3, and then I'll keep them marks corresponding with each gear so that I know which where and where, so that everything is just back to exactly how it was and how I knew obviously it ran one day and obviously ran okay, because moving parts and stuff around, changing them around, different wear patterns and tiny intolerances here and there over time can cause problems. So we're just not even go down that road. One. Right, so we make that number 2, so I put 2 marks on it. That's number 2. Keep number 2 together. Got this cleaned up there with the wire brush, pretty good. So I'm going to run it through the parts wash, just parts wash it. But first I'm going to clean the gears. So I've everything ready for the parts wash. See how I get on with the parts wash. I took that bushing out. It seems to be okay, like, so there was nothing, no major wear or anything on it, but there's a slight bit on the edge, but it was dirty, a bit of rust on that, and so I'll just get a new bush. They're not expensive, so put a new bush in. But also I noticed that there was some rust in behind the bush in the soil gallery, so I want to clean that all up. So yeah, do that now. Give them a wee bit of a scrub, get all the rough dirt off. It'll be spotless and leaves us a good blank canvas to put everything back together. Make sure that all the oil holes are free. There's a little hole here, goes into the centre to lubricate this bush. Make sure all them are free and any basic dirt. Here's a little wipe. This is a mixture of a degreaser and kerosene. You can buy it in large cans, it's not very expensive. This has been in this a long time, it's done quite a bit of work and it's still pretty good. If you leave this stuff to dry, it just dries out perfectly clean and it's very, very good. So folks, been a little bit of time. It won't probably be noticeable in the video, but we are ready to start putting this back together. A lot of this, obviously, to most would look a mess, but I will go through it, each part individually. I've a lot of work to just put packs back together and stuff like that. I have a lot of new parts. Some of this stuff has come from Nick Young in the UK. If anybody's looking parts, John Deere parts, this man is actually very approachable, very nice to speak to. Yeah, he's very, very helpful, and he's considerably cheaper than John Deere for a lot of parts. For instance, that's a PTO rebuild pack, and comes with a kit and all the seals and everything involved. So this is an absolute mess at the moment, but we're going to get there bit by bit. So these are parts out of John Deere, and filter, a couple of gaskets. This is a part of the PTO pack that was worn on the inside. I'll show you that when I'm putting it together. This is a part of the 4-wheel drive unit actually that was worn out. And this ready, you got a new O-ring for this. This is a brand new transmission pump, and I've got this in Connaughty's in Kells, County Meath, and yeah, price wise in comparison to what you're dealing with John Deere, you're dealing with probably, it's only about half, not even half, it's not half the price of what it would be in John Deere to buy this pump. And that's a brand new pump, it's perfectly fresh. And I don't know whether they're rebuilt units or not, Don't know whether they're machined from scratch or not, but I'm sure some parts of them are. But it doesn't make any difference. It's fully tested and it's brand new. So I'm going to put that in. I'm going to put the PTO brake in, down in here in the bottom. And I'm going to slowly start building up the parts. So I have some parts rebuilt, but I'm going to rebuild the PTO pack itself. And piece by piece I'm going to start adding all the bits in. I want to get this whole section here all rebuilt. I'm into another small dilemma in here in the gearbox, so I want to change the 4th gear synchro, and I have all that out here at the moment. I'm trying to source a 4th gear synchro because price wise they're crazy. So I'll try to get the 2 dog teeth, and I have to line up with these marks here, so let's try and get that just perfect. Just kind of forgot myself for a moment there why it wouldn't lock in and engage, because this is the main drive for the pump. It's the only thing that drives the pump. And there's it in now, so it just sits in nice and flush. And then we're going to use the ring then to go over and retain that bearing. Some of these parts are brand new and some are old, so I washed all my parts, obviously, of course, first of all. Make sure everything's ready for reinstallation. Seals, these are piston ring seals. Go on the back of this, which I haven't actually removed the old ones yet. So I'm going to put them on in a minute, like all the rest of it. And I've got 2 seals with this kit. Now this is confusing me because this is like a type of a hard type seal here, and then you have the original rubber seal that I just kind of slid down in there. It's a little square seal, and this is the old one. This was the failure on the pack. That was actually like that when I took that out. It completely split. So now I'm wondering, is this hardened seal supposed to be over this seal whenever you put it in? It is very, very difficult to stretch, so I have my doubts, but I'm wondering, has John Deere replaced that seal with this harder one and got rid of the rubber seal, that the rubber seal was failing? But I actually don't know. It only gives in any manual online or the manual that I actually have for the tractor. That I was wondering, was there a part that I wasn't seeing, or did somebody else have this apart and not put it back in? So this is the seal here that I want to put back in. This is the new one. So if I slide this down into place, let's set up the camera here. Slide that in. Also to try and remember what way around it goes. So that's it. So now it's actually in. Now I see that obviously there's probably a little bit of stretch on it from me walking on it, but like it does take up the entire space down there. And if I put my new piston in, this is a brand new piston by the way, because I'll just show you the old one. The old one's damaged in here. Damaged edge in there. There's an actual, there's a little bit of an edge on that. The edge on that was from the seal going and rubbing against the side of the shaft. So this is a new one. This was around about 60, probably nearly €70 for this. But without it, it's kind of a waste of time putting in a bad piston back on a new seal. So I'm touching the seal there now, and I have a taper to help it guide in past the seal. I have the new rings here. We'll stick them on now anyway. So pull these off first. So these are just kind of, they're like a little lock on them as such, they're like to step together. Let's just separate the lock. Just push one down and out to go. Very straightforward. And the same with that one. Put 2 new rings there. Obviously these are like kind of like a piston ring idea, so any overstretching would snap these rings, so we're just going to be very careful when we're putting them in. Well, I don't actually need to stretch these at all, these are kind of already pre-stretched, so I'm just going to lock them in. So that's one in. And that's 2 in. Just like that. That one's fairly straightforward. Now the new piston also has an outer seal, and that outer seal is in the form of a metal ring. The oil pressure goes in behind this, it pushes up and locks the packs in place. So the new ring will sit on that like so. And it obviously doesn't sit on it very well when it's new, because it has a lot of compression to get from when you push it in. So this is kind of a balancing act in getting this in and getting the seal in the center as well, and making sure everything goes in without nipping anything. So I have a feeling that's is what happened, the old seal. So since I have an edge here, I'm going to have to try and get this down past the edge. So I just a couple of screwdrivers here. Keep them in there on the edges of that. Help just keep the gap open, keep the gap closed so I can slide down the piston. So I get it on down past that point. Now I have put a wee bit of grease on the seal, so as long as I'm nice and careful, I should be able to slide it down past it. The problem is the ring, you know, so there it goes. So I just managed to get it in around the edge. I'm just going to walk it down over the other seal. Feels about right, because I can still turn. If I had nipped the seal, it would be most likely wedged very tight, so that seems about right. So before I put it all together, I'll probably put a wee bit of oil into it. Just get some oil in through the back of it here where the feed is. Just feed in between these rings. That's how this pack is fed. So this hole here, these rings keep a seal, and the oil gets in through this edge here, through the casing that it sits in. So I'll feed a little bit of oil in through that hole. It'll go in the back of the piston and help lubricate that whole system before it even moves, because I obviously don't really have much oil in there, and it's going to take a little while for it to get into it, but it'll not do any harm. But it's just always good to get a little bit of lubrication in there to make sure that everything is sweet. So that's that bit. So next bit is going to be, this is the old set of packs here, and as you can see, some of them very highly discolored, so if you can see the tips, the discoloration of the tips, that means that that pack got extremely hot. Most likely run without oil and a lot of different things going on there, but so we're just going to change that completely, except for this main end plate here, which is the upper side. So I'm going to keep this, and the rest is going to be junk. And I have my new plates here. This is all a brand new pack, so I just have to put these together as such. So once the piston's in, next move is the spring. So I'm going to have to get the spring pushed down there, right down till I get it into this ring down and around the lock ring down and around this main sliding shaft. So I get some oil in here. Hopefully, just checking to make sure it's actually oil. So I had to come up with this a few minutes ago, right? So this ring is actually very difficult to get in because it's very light. When I got it off, I wish I had made this previous to taking it off, because I was using sockets on each side and it was bending, and just it's not very strong. So I just cut this old piece of bearing. I cut these slots out very easy, just marked where each one was, each side of each one, just cut it that way right round. It only took 2 minutes, not even. And then I cut a bit of an inspection point where I could get in at it. So then when I put this down on the top of the spring, this will just sit nice and tight. Now obviously I need something to be able to push on this that still gives me access. So I just got a little piece of rebar, cut a couple of slots in the bottom of it. I don't know if you can see them slots, but when I get the bearing, it just sits down nicely into the slots, and I just grind it off a little bit of a flat spot on that, so it allows the press to sit into. So I'm just going to put that in like that. I have my inspection point now, so I can kind of get in, maybe to pop my snap ring in whenever I get it pushed down. So alright, so I'll put that in first, I suppose. So now when I put this in, I should be able to push this down. It's well worth making that up, because it really will save a lot of time, or if you don't have the correct tools. There's obviously correct tools for everything that's made like that, but in this case, maybe not. You must have to be very careful pushing this in, because I'm worried about damaging that ring. Got caught, it'll bend it. So I think now I am down past. I can see the inspection point from here. Move the camera. Try to give some light. But the inspection point I can see in through the side of the bearing tool, so I'm going to try and get this snap ring in here now by pushing it down from this far side and in on this side as well. It was very long to film that, getting that snap ring in. Combination of 3 screwdrivers. I don't have a pair of snap ring pliers, which I should have, and that's probably one of the next investments, because that was torture. Probably took about 15 minutes to get that in. So anyway, I'll just let it off here now. As you can see, the snap ring is holding it in a position. Actually, the snap ring's not in fully yet. I just better be very careful now with that. Get another little push on the back, and now it is in. It's just sitting out a wee bit on the back. So that's it. So snap ring's in. Now that I've all back in, I have circular bin, I have all my packs all in, it all sits loose. I'm going to do a double check, make sure I forgot nothing, make sure there was no small parts that I forgot. So the new packs installed means that whenever the piston gets oil, it forces pressure up against all this section here, and you get your plates lock up. So from here on out now, I'm just going to do a check, and then I'll be ready to put it back in the tractor. So at this point here now, I put the spacer in around this. So the original spacer was built up at some stage, and it wasn't. It's not right. Obviously, it was damaged and wore down. So it sits down over the side of this. So I got a new one for it. Another, I think, around €70 again, just for a piece of pipe. Really, that's all it is. There's nothing else to it. It's just a spacer. So that goes down around that, and our last ring goes on, and that maintains a gap in the packs all the time until the piston pushes up and engages the packs. So then I just put the rest of these are springs. This is what maintains pressure against it to return it. So where did I go? That there goes like that. These are coned. So these have like need some dry paper. They have a concave or convex on them, whatever you like to say, concave I suppose. And they go opposite, and they create a spring. Just simply go in like that. I just press this down and get the ring in. So number one is I have to line it up with this. I have to make sure it's well lined up, or it's not going to work obviously. So that ring won't fall out. No, it fell out. Just put that there, somewhere there. If I play around with them, they should all just slowly just fall in place. I'll know from the center here because I can see the ring, so I know where it stops. Might be one more. That's it actually. Just lift it out now and see. Yeah, that was them all. So this is an old kind of a counterbalance flywheel for Gearbox, and I just use it for the press, for work, for just pushing certain things down. So it looks like it's probably near enough what I'm looking to do. I don't know yet. I'll give it a little push and see if it'll give me enough clearance to get me circlip in. If it doesn't, I'm going to have to think again, probably go out a little bit further with something wider. But we'll just give this a wee push now and see what happens. I made it. So that's the pack fully pressurized now with the springs. Right, and hopefully everything lines up now that I can set the other section down with that. If not, I'll have to loose this off again. I'll have to try again. That's back together now. That one went together no problem once with a small bit of persuasion. It was literally, as I said, it needed to go down another plate, and I just got the tip of the back of the hammer and I just tapped it here, literally each side, and it just walked down. No pressure, no forcing around, because we just wanted it absolutely perfect. And it's together now, and the spacer ring, everything sits really well, so it's exactly as it needs to be, unlike the way it was where the spacer ring was actually floating around. So anyway, all's good there. So that's all back together. I have these two covers here now. I'm going to stick these on. These covers are broken, but it wasn't me that broke them. They broke a long time, and all these covers do is keep, since the four-wheel drive is in the very bottom of the tractor, it's constantly immersed in oil. So if this was spinning the entire time, it would churn up the whole bottom end of oil, probably lift sediment, dirt, probably, if there was some, and it would also probably foam the oil a bit. But these covers kind of keep it enclosed to avoid that all happening as much as possible, and that's all they're really for. They don't maintain pressure or anything. I priced these to get, and they were absolute crazy. Like the price of these, there was something, I think they walk out over 300 and something euro for just these couple of covers. So we weren't replacing them. They're perfectly fine once they go together. I'll show you now. And there's two small bolts on each side. There's a bit of a hole in that corner, but otherwise the only thing that's exposed is the edge here where the gear is, and then there's obviously a little bit extra gear exposed, but it's not going to cause any issues. Hasn't caused any issues in the past, so we're not going to worry about it. There's definitely not been an issue. Four-wheel drive unit in its entirety there, and the shaft is in now, but the shaft has to come back out for it to be installed. I'm not actually one bit worried about that at all. We just pull that tapered roller bearing off, pull that washer out, pull the shaft out, and then you just put your unit in, put your shaft in when you're about to install your unit. They're very easy to install and remove. You literally lower the bottom cover, open these studs, take out your prop shaft and pull that shaft out, and you can drop that out at any time. You don't have to split the tractor or anything to access the four-wheel drive unit. So it's very easy to maintain, and that it's very easy to get access to. So after a long kind of a run on a time lapse here, because there actually has been quite a bit of time spent on this already, getting places now, but the problem was when I took this apart, yeah, I was taking apart a bit of a rush with the help of someone else and didn't really take due care as to where everything went. So I had to work my way backwards and try and figure out where everything went, and then obviously start putting it back together. So the selectors obviously are over here, and you can see they're in there moving around. So I have them pretty much in the right position. They just have to be tightened in. That's only one of them, by the way. The other one isn't even in yet. It's laying over there. So I'll put it in next, but I know what parts is for what. So the other issue I came up upon, which I wasn't sure where they went, but I figured it out eventually. There's little balls on this here for your selection. So when you select a gear and your gear stick kind of locks in a position, there's a little ball and a spring that holds that, for anybody who doesn't understand. But I wasn't just sure as to where there was an extra few balls that had came out of this, and I just wasn't sure exactly where they went. So you have a ball, this section here, you have a ball that locks into this section here, but you also have a ball from the side. So in other words, in between each of these, there's two balls. so that only ever one of these rods can be selected at one time, so that you can't select 2 gears at once. So you can see just in there, there's an indent of a spring and a ball sits on that. But also on the other side, you can see the ball actually sitting out. Just push it back in now. So there's a ball there and a ball on the bottom, and it takes a lot of playing around to get them all back in, to make sure you don't lose them, to get them in, get them locked in. And it takes a bit of messing around with these here to twist these in a certain way that you can slide it across the balls and then slide it back into position when you need it locked on. So in total there's 8 balls, so there's 2 balls per rod. So you have 4 shift rods and you have 2 balls per rod. So only one on each rod is on a spring. There's only the springs on the bottom. A spring on the bottom here, spring on the bottom here, etc. across the whole way. And there's a ball sits on each one and locks each one in position. But then you have a ball in between each, just to ensure that each rod stays in position if the other rod's moving. So it's either one or the other. So that avoids anything happening with you getting stuck in gear or getting 2 gears in at once, locked on at once, or silly things like that. So in other words, absolutely smashing the gearbox. So that's what is going on at the moment. This here takes a lot of work. Obviously, get these selector rods in and get the actual selector. I'm not sure what you actually call them now off my head, but these here lock into position on these rods to slide these rods up and down. They just slide in here. Here's an example of one is this here. So he'll sit in that rod and it'll push it over and back like this here, just like that there, and that will be done on the rotation of the selector. Synchromesh ring here, you have your selector fork, and that selector fork attaches to this rod, and that rod moves the selector fork forward and back. So I'm getting places here, and I'm going to set it back up on time lapse. You see as I get through it. I've kind of explained. I'll try and explain anything else that I see fairly technical. This here, I did shim this up, so I'm happy with this now that there's no play. There's a lot of play in this. I have this all set. Down here, there's a brand new bearing in here that I was waiting on for a while, and I've shimmed the back of it, and I will only know when this is all in whether or not that gear has play or doesn't have play, or is okay or isn't okay. So I'm sure there is probably another way of doing it, but I am not aware of that way. I think it's more or less the only way you could do it is to push this in, measure from the front cover back to the shaft. But in my opinion, the best way to do it, if you don't have all the tools at your disposal, is to put it in and then check your shaft play here on the end. And you'll know if you have too much shaft play, then you're going to have to pull it back out and put more shims on it. Now, the way it is and the way it works, I don't really want to have to keep pulling it out, but that is just the way it is, and I have to do it the slow way. But I will get it together and we'll get it all back up and running. So You may have noticed from my time lapse as I was walking through this, I came to a bit of a difficulty here where I was wondering why my bearing here, including the spacer that should go in, because this spacer ensures that this part of the race, well, I should say this part of the bearing doesn't touch the actual shaft here when it goes in, that it doesn't impact this, because if it impacts this here, you're going to destroy this if you put it up against it. So this spacer just gives you the clearance you need to keep the bearing on the shaft properly. And along with that, there's a few shims that were originally in this and the other shaft I got. So it was kind of, you just work it out as you go and make sure that your bearings sit nice and snug. But unfortunately, in the midst of doing it all, I was wondering why I had a small issue with that. So with the spacer going in, things weren't even near close. So I put that bearing in, I have a huge gap, and that is up tight against the shaft, so that cannot go in any further. So when I put the nut on and I tighten it, the bearing's just going to tighten against the spacer. So the spacer will be here, so I'll explain on this. So the spacer is sitting here, and the bearing goes on. Probably push this on, but if you get what I mean, when this goes in as far as here and you tighten the nut, the bearing cannot move anymore to thrust this shaft up tight, because we have in here is another taper roller bearing in here. So that is that shaft. It's only a small section. You can see this section is shaking. The other section's separate. So this section here, there's a taper roller bearing here, and then you have your taper roller bearing here. And the idea is that when you tighten them up, it pulls the shaft solid so that you can't walk around, and it just sits nice and even in the gearbox. So that's okay. So I decided to do some investigations, took the vernier out, checked everything, and noticed then that I had a difference in length here on the shaft that was in it. So these are the things you really want to be checking, I suppose, before you go ahead and do what I just done. But these are the type of things you meet on every day working with things like this. It was just unfortunate, so I'll explain now. If I can get this off. It doesn't want to come off now. So anyway, this distance here is this much, which showing, I know my digital isn't really working, but showing 33 mil. And on this one here, it's a good bit less. So which means it would allow the bearing to go in further and tighten up further. So I think there also could be possibly a difference in length in this here as well. So in other words, it's different. So I'm going to have to strip the whole top of the gearbox again, take the shaft out and start again. So it's a bit of a disappointment, but however, could be always, could be worse. So I got to get my problem sorted out. Obviously I took the gearbox apart, and this is my old shaft, and I ended up with this one. So I know it's rusty again, it'll be like the last one. I'm gonna have to clean it up. Doesn't matter, but it's kind of oily anyway, won't make any difference. Give it a light rub of a little bit of sandpaper, clean it up. Unfortunately, I have to do this. Now, the collar, I'll lightly clean that. I'm not going to be really sanding that, because you want the bearing to seat on that nice and snug. So I'll give probably maybe a rub with a very light paper, just to kind of get it smoothed out. But otherwise, I'll be oiling it up and pushing the bearing on to make sure it's nice and tight. That one's a good one. The guys actually that supplied me the shaft in the first place said they'd never seen the difference in the collars before. So there just happened to be bad luck, I suppose. He had another maybe couple of these laying there, and the one he did give me originally was actually one that was the only one of that type he had, so the rest were the same as my own. So anyway, get this cleaned up here now, and we get this one in instead. So I have to get this bearing off as well. I'll take a wee video of this now as I take this off. I have to get my puller set out again, and we'll lift this off. Take the pullers for it. Let's try to get a little bit of a pull on this. And there's moving now, so you can see the gap coming in it. So it was mainly to get it in behind the edge of the bearing. So once I get it moving, there should be no problems. The common mistake made with these pullers is people will use a spanner or something on these to pull these more, to get more leverage on them, but you'll actually burst the seals in these. So you should only ever use these with your hand. Just a small note, I suppose, some information for some people, because I've seen many of these destroyed and they're not that cheap. So being honest, actually I think the whole puller set is cheaper than buying one of these on their own. So you as well just use it for what way it's intended. It does give you warnings. I just seen a lot of them fail. You automatically think if it won't pull it, if the hydraulic strength on it isn't strong enough, you automatically go to pull it harder, but in that case it will destroy itself. So I just don't advise it. So we just keep walking it out here. Once I get it past this, the main actually seat for the bearing, once it gets to these gear, then parts of the teeth of the shaft, it will move a lot easier anyway. It should kind of slide off it, hopefully. And there you go. That's how you, for anybody who would maybe doing this without the proper equipment, I suppose, would, you know, the reason I'm taking that bearing off obviously is because it's old and I don't need it. The original one is going to be going back onto this one because there's nothing wrong with the bearing. But if you were to not have the equipment to do this, cutting the bearing is always an option. You know, like just using an angle grinder to cut through the race and getting a chisel, make sure there's glasses on, you've glasses and gloves on, split the race of the bearing once you cut through it far enough that you don't damage your shaft, and we'll get it off too. Right, okay. Probably will change the bearing as well. It's actually not bad looking, actually. Might be okay, there's no damage on it. So, let's see how we start. Start with a wire brush. It's doing most of what I need. So just to give people an idea, This shaft in John Deere, I can't remember if I mentioned before, is in and around what was it again? Yeah, it was like €1,200 plus VAT for the shaft. So like, it's absolutely crazy kind of prices for parts for an old machine like that. That, you know, and once if you can get your hands on the parts that are equally as good second hand, it's well worth it, because that kind of money, a machine at that age, especially one that won't be doing the hours that a tractor on the road every day would be doing, you'd be crazy. Like, I got this for pretty much a fraction, like probably about a fifth of that price, roughly. Probably in and around, I think it was in and around €300, which is still a lot of money for the shaft. But once it's good, I suppose it doesn't really make any difference. It'll do the same job. So yeah, so that there's a little bit rough. I might rub that with a wee bit of paper to make sure I have a good seat for my bearing. Actually, no, that's not the bearing. Yeah, so I'm going to clean this in the parts wash now, and it should be good. So that turned out a bit better than I expected it would, so that's looking good. All cleaned up nicely. So I know it might look nice, but it won't make any difference once it's all intact. It's just a little bit of staining, rust staining. It won't make any difference. It's all there. It's actually in very good shape. So we'll put the parts onto it as such. The nut will go on here, and have to knock in the sides of that nut then to lock it in place. But we'll do all that when we get it back in. So I'm going to get this back, get this over to the tractor now, and start getting it back together. I'm going to put Bocking ring on here now. So the Bocking ring here, it was one of the biggest problems we had with this, was that it wasn't gripping, so it had ruined the old one. So that one there is very good. So that should be gripping on that shaft for anybody who would like to know what that's about. So when you're changing gear, that's what helps your gear change, as such that you can get a gear in while you're moving, because the shaft will be spinning, but this slows the shaft down when you hit the clutch, and then you get it to synchro mesh. So we're back together. Everything is in. Everything's operating the way it should be. We have our reverses, our high-lows, our 1, 2, and 3, and 4. So we go 1, 2, 3, and 4. And none of these can walk together, so what you'd be concerned about is making sure that none of them can operate alongside another gear, or you'd have a smash. So everything operates, has the locking mechanism works on every gear. Took a little while to shim this up. That there bearing's now perfectly tight in there with shims in behind it to make sure everything's solid. I set this little screw on this now. What this does is this stabilizes this shaft to make sure that everything isn't loose. So from this shaft to this shaft, it kind of just gives it a bit of support, and it also supports this one, kind of just tightens them up to give, I suppose, a lot of play. It takes a lot of play out of them and gives them a nice kind of solid. If you can hear, it's kind of just nice and smooth. It doesn't, whereas before when that was loose, it was kind of rattling as soon as you change gear really loosely. So I guess as well, it would be a big thing to make sure that it wouldn't hop out of gear. So it also probably does something like that. But everything, as I say, everything's selecting, everything's locked, everything's screwed together. There's no screws missing. Everything was tightened. All these were tightened. All the selectors I'll go over them before I close it back up just to be sure again, just do another check. It's not something you want to miss. This here worked out perfect, didn't need to shim this anymore. I checked that earlier when I was putting the cover on. All I did was check and keep an eye on the shims in here. And as I brought the casing in, I was watching the shims, and the shims just started to tighten up on the back of the bearing, so I knew it was just starting to bite, and it just took that little bit of a nip in, so just perfect. So there's no play in that shaft anymore. There's no play in this one. There was play in all these shafts. All these had play in them. Now they no longer do. There's our new 4th gear now, and a new bobbin ring in here. The big thing to make sure is to make sure that that does not, while you're driving or whenever the tractor is actually running, this 4th gear. So that 4th gear, you would not want this here ring to be locked in any way and spinning on this shaft, because it would burn it out. And if it burns it out, you know, there's no hope for it. So once it burns out, you lose your synchro mesh. You have a crunch on your gear every time you change. So ideally, that's what we wanted to get rid of. So yeah, happy enough to get this far. There's a lot more to go, but the gearbox is built back up. To explain this to anyone who needs to know or may want to know, the idea of this is these rings on this shaft maintain an oil seal in the center here to allow oil to travel through this hole. So in here you can see on this one here, or even the old one, yeah, there's a groove in there in the center where the oil can travel, but yet this maintains oil pressure on each side and in the center to make sure that there's a seal that runs down through, allows oil to pass right down through the hole in the center of the shaft and get delivered to different areas. So that's the idea of that, just in case anyone's needing to know that. So as you've seen there, got that all back together. So that's the fresh unit that has no damage on it. So the main thing was this here, that was all damaged in this one. So there's a really hard edge on that there. So I had to change that and make sure it was going to be fit for purpose now. So that's that done, and yeah, I'm going to get back into it now. So that's our ultimately that's that goal achieved. So I have to put this together now. This has to be shimmed in terms of like whenever it comes to meet this, it has to go in here, and hopefully it goes in, which it does. That's exactly what we want. So that's what keeps that spinning and keeps your high-low and everything running sweet. And that there will go into the center of the high-low and pick up the main drive. That's your main drive. So that's where we're at. That's it. Getting to a good stage now. Everything, obviously the 4-wheel drive isn't in, but all the other bits and pieces is in. I have a new gasket kit here, new seals. So all them seals will go, for instance, let's see, one of these ones will go in around that there. It's probably the big one. Yep, some there. He just sits a little bit proud of that edge there, and then whenever he goes together, he tightens up, seals that to the rear housing. So I'm going to just bring this all together now. I'm going to get this gasket on and that. I've all my bolts washed for joining it up. That one's all nice and clean. These here, I'm just going to stick. You see, there's 2 different types, I think, and I obviously only need 1, but they send you 2 because it's only a piece of paper, really. But this gasket, I'm going to use this, and I'm going to use a little bit of this sealer, a small amount of that. Sometimes I used to use shellac or Indian head, to call it, gasket. sealers for head gaskets, and it's handy for sticking gaskets on and that, but I don't actually have any at the moment. So a very, 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 very small, I mean very small amount of this. People will argue the point that you shouldn't need to use it for new gaskets. Yes, true, but when you're dealing with old equipment that has been taken apart a few times, you might have marks, scratches, little things. The tiniest amount of this won't do any harm. If you're in around car engines, especially modern car engines and stuff like that, and small things, the intricate things, you shouldn't use it because it can get in and block ports, block oil galleries, etc. But if you use a very, very sparingly amount of this here along around the edge of a gasket, it will help it seal, and it will also, it'll just give you a lot of peace of mind to know that whenever you get it back, all back together, that it's probably not going to weep any oil on you and make it look like a horrible mess, because it's nothing worse than going to this extent of work and then putting something together and it leaking on you. So anyway. So that's all back together now, thankfully. Bit of an episode with the jack and a couple of different things, but issues you have to make sure they're very, very well lined up, so there's a jack here and jack at the back. And a big issue with these can be is you have your high-low shaft that you would have been able to see on camera a few minutes ago, that slides into the high-low unit, but it sits in the back end here. Well, it's like this shaft is free, but this shaft here is attached to that shaft that goes right through. And if you push that hard enough against in here, and if it can't mesh with the gear, well then it'll actually break this housing. So be very careful about that whenever you're ever putting these together, because you'll just destroy that housing, and actually this whole back end is actually ruined unless you have a way of welding that or fixing it, which usually nobody has. So when you're putting these together, they literally should just slide together nice and gently. You can use the bolts literally to gently nip it, but don't ever pull very hard on the bolts all round, or you'll literally do that, you'll bust that. You can use the bolts to gently pull it together, but it literally should screw together on the bolts. It shouldn't have any resistance to pulling together once you have it lined up. So that's it. I'm going to try and get the shift cover on here now and another few bits. So we're at this point now. So lift cover's on, shift cover's on. Next is probably might put that 4-wheel drive unit in. It's only a matter of up and underneath here, goes in here. That's these were designed that you could remove the 4-wheel drive without going to any extremes with the tractor and splitting it or anything. So 4-wheel drive sits up into the bottom, and I have to do the arms. The arms are all loosened out because I had the lift cover off, obviously, so I have to put all them on, bits and pieces. There's a few pipes and stuff, loads of little bits and pieces. I'm going to do all those now when the cab's up out of the way, when the wheel's off, easy accessible, and when I get all that done, we'll put the cab on. Right, so we're back, ready to try put the cab back on. So my little international going here now. I'm going to use it to pull the tractor up the shed. There's a bit of a slope on this floor, so I'm going to use it to pull it up. The shed was easier to roll it out by hand because it's on the slope, but let's use the tractor now to pull it up. So nearly complete, nearly everything back on. Tighten up some few jubilee clips. There's still the diesel tank put in, and I have another couple of pieces to put on. Battery boxes, so and so, can't get that with one hand, but you get the drift. All mounts are on, link rods are all on. Missing a couple of little clips and stuff, but otherwise just a few things like hitch cable has to go on, some basic things, stop cable has to go on, a few bits and pieces, but well away, so shouldn't be too long now. Get the tank in there and then get it all piped up. Okay, so if this all set up again, the gauge is all hooked up. I'm going to start the tractor now. The tractor has been running for a while. We've had did a few jobs with it. Everything's working the way it should be, so we're happy with it. So I'm going to run the tractor now, and you'll see the pressure of the new pump and how much it differs from the way the tractor was originally. So I've already checked the tractor for the gear, etc. and that. Just swing it over here. Already at about 160 psi. Thereabouts. Oh, sorry, about 150. It's very decent. Everything now is as it should be. Pressure wise, everything works, everything is operating correctly. Pleased with the results of the whole entire project. We're a lot better off than the case where we were. All the gearing and everything in the tractor is so much better. Fourth gear, synchro, etc. is all good, doesn't crunch in the gears anymore. So yeah, it was a good result all around. Another small point I have here on the tractor, so the spool valves, the slices that we replaced, an entire block of these that I replaced. So if anybody has issues with not being able to get a pipe on a tractor while it's running, these here are the lanes. If those slices are leaking, there will be pressure against these here and you won't be able to get your pipes in. So now I can plug and play pipes here when the tractor's still running. The pipe, we used to have to actually switch the tractor off to get the pipes onto these quick couplers. So it works now without that. So that's just another wee tip.
So I say onwards to the next project.